Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, here to share with you one of my discussion videos. Now, with the massive success of the most recent Dead Space remake, and with the upcoming Resident Evil 4 remake coming not too long from now, I thought it was an interesting discussion to wonder, are we entering a new period where just, we're going to start getting remakes at a much faster rate? Now, don't get me wrong, remakes and, remasters have been a thing for a long time, but I just feel like now more than ever, we're starting to get them at a much faster rate. And that just got me thinking, what games have I played do I think are deserving of a remake, and what games have I played that I think should be left alone and should not be remade? And that's exactly what this particular video is going to be about. So, before starting, if you do happen to enjoy this video by again, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep tracking me on my future videos. Remember, if you have any ideas for future topic videos that you'd like me to discuss, let me know in the comments down below. So, right now, I'm going to go into 5 of my all-time favorite games that I've ever played that I personally believe do not need to be remade and should be left alone just so that future generations can play them in their original state and hopefully enjoy them as much as I did. So, let's start off with the very first game that I think, and this isn't going to be in any particular ranking order, just 5 games I've loved for, since the day I played them the first time till now that I just don't want to see them get remade. I think they're perfect just the way they are and should just be left alone. So let's start off with the first game on my list. Starting off with the first game on my list. Now remember, this list isn't in just in particular order, just games that, 5 games that I don't want them to ever remake. And it's going to come to a game that has already been rumored to possibly already be getting a remake, and that is without doubt my favorite video game of all time, and that is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. This is it. This is the GOAT for games when it comes to me, at least. Now, again, there have been rumors that apparently Konami is going to announce a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake at this year's E3. I hope those rumors are completely false and that they just don't do it. Now, here's the reason why I don't want them to do a remake. Number one, Kojima isn't there. So without that Kojima essence, it wouldn't feel like a Metal Gear Solid game. Number two, I do not trust Konami with this franchise. The first time that Konami actually tried to release a Metal Gear Solid game without Kojima being involved in any sense, what did we get? We got Metal Gear Survive, and we all know how much of a disaster that game was. I just feel that they just don't know what they're doing. They're sitting on a gold mine. They're sitting on one of the most prestigious franchises that I've ever played, and they have no idea what to do with it. And so for them to attempt to take my favorite video game of all time, and in some cases some think it's also the best Metal Gear Solid game of all time, and try to remake it, just feels like it would feel like a completely different game. Now, if Konami wants to do something with the property that they own, they should just do a hard reboot and just do everything their own way. Have it not feel like this is something that would have come from Kojima. Because I'm telling you, without Kojima there, it just, again, doesn't feel like Metal Gear at all. And on top of that, if they're going to remake a Metal Gear Solid game, why wouldn't they just start off with the first Metal Gear Solid game? Or heck, go back even farther. Why don't we just start with the first Metal Gear game? Remake that, update that, and then start your own story and have it be very different from the original storyline. And then Konami can do whatever the heck they want. And heck, if fans want to support it, that's fine. They can signify this as the new Konami era of Metal Gear and not be anything associated with the Kojima era of Metal Gear. So, again, I just cannot possibly stomach the idea that Konami is going to try to remake my favorite video game of all time and use it as a cheap cash grab. Like, look, if you're going to remake a game, it needs to come from a place of love and not profit. Trust me, profit is a goal, but I think that you at least need to care about your franchise. And in my opinion, Konami has never actually cared about this franchise at all. And the only man who ever actually cared about it isn't there anymore, and he's doing his own thing. And I think he's doing a pretty solid job with his own thing, which is why Metal Gear Solid 3 should never, ever be remade. Now, going into the next game that I do not think that they should ever remake. Might be a little bit controversial because, heck, a remake in this franchise just came out, so the obvious choice is, heck, we want to continue this momentum and get another remake to this, into this franchise, and that is a remake to Dead Space 2. Don't want it. Dead Space 2 in the condition that it was originally in is just fine. It is a perfect game. It is currently standing as my 4th favorite video game of all time. There's only 3 games in the history of this industry that I would ever even think about picking over it, and I just don't think it needs a remake. Now, trust me. Now, believe me. I thought the Dead Space 1 remake was great, but all they did was take elements from Dead Spaces 2 and 3 and insert it into this game. which means I don't really know what more you could do with a Dead Space 2 remake. And it still holds up. This game is incredibly fun. It holds up incredibly well. Its story is perfectly fine the way it is. So I just don't really think that there's enough justification or enough reasoning to want to remake it. Now again, just financially, reputation-wise, if this had done so well, the obvious choice is to, well, let's see if we can remake 2 and 3. In fact, I even saw posts online about people putting up a poll saying, would you like them to remake Dead Spaces 2 and 3? And it was like overwhelmingly positive that people want these games to get remade. And it's not even like, I just don't think it's necessary. And again, it's a perfect game the way it is. The only thing I wish I could do is just play it on current consoles. I mean, I guess they might have like a subscription service that allows me to do that with like Dead Space 3, but the fact that Dead Space 2 is in the current state that it's in, I've only been able to play it on my PlayStation 3. I just wish I had the ability to play it on my PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5. If I could do that, then there's absolutely no need to remake it. I would easily pay full price to play this on my PlayStation 5 in the current I would personally pay full price to play Dead Space 2 in the current condition that it's in the current form that it's in. Maybe you might want to smoothen out some of the graphics, but I think the game still looks incredibly well, and it's just not necessary. If you're gonna remake a game, it should have a good reason to do so. And heck, if anything, don't remake 2 and 3. If anything, why don't we make a Dead Space 4 and continue the story that Dead Space 3 left off in? Because again, that left off on a cliffhanger. I think that the success of the Dead Space remake has shown that there's still a lot of interest in this franchise. And I think that we now, we have a brand new studio taking over this franchise, let's actually continue on from where it left off. I think that would be a much better idea than just remaking an already incredible game, which still holds up to this day, which is why I would not like them to remake Dead Space 2. Now, the third game that I don't think that they should ever even consider remaking is maybe not so much based upon my fear that they might remake this, but it's simply based off the fact that I recently played a game called Atomic Heart, and that game felt very, very familiar to another popular game, and that's when the gear started rolling that maybe one day we could see a potential remake to this classic and masterpiece of a title, and I just hope it never happens. And that is in the form of the very first BioShock. This is such an incredible game. I think even at one point, this won so many awards when this game came out, and it is still to this day the best BioShock game of all time. Its storytelling, its atmosphere of rapture, its game mechanics, its exploration, everything about this game just makes it a masterpiece in some people's cases. It's got like a couple little technical flaws that kind of hold it back from being like a perfect game to me, but that doesn't stop it from being one of the most innovative and just most fascinating gaming worlds that I've ever experienced in gaming. And I just think that the only thing that they could possibly add is maybe making Rapture look a little bit better with modern graphics. I don't really think there's anything you could really add to this game that would enhance the experience of exploring through Rapture at this point in time. And therefore, I simply do not think that this is a game that ever needs to be remade in any sense. I mean, heck, if you want to have just play it, just re-release it and I'll have no issue playing it all over again. Heck, I would have a blast streaming this and playing this on PlayStation 5. And I think you can actually do that right now, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think so. But it's just the fear that, heck, they might get desperate enough to try to remake this, and I just don't think it's necessary. So, yeah, I think the third game they should never even think about remaking is the first BioShock game. Okay, now the next game that I hope never gets remade might just be me being petty, because of this new pattern that Capcom is doing with remaking older Resident Evil games. I fear that they'll eventually run into this title, and I've already seen multiple people talk about this online. But another game that I hope they never remake is Resident Evil 5. Now, I must be like only one or maybe 5 people on this planet that actually really likes this game. I really love Resident Evil 5 in the condition that it's in. Right behind Resident Evil 4 is my second favorite Resident Evil game of all time, and this is just like the original Resident Evil 4 game. It's something I actually go back and play it at least once every year and have a blast playing it, especially when I get to play it with one of my viewers or friends online. It's just a blast to play. Now, sure, is the story not quite as tight as some would expect? Sure. Is there some silliness to it? Sure. Are there a couple of game mechanics that could have been smoothed out a little bit? Okay, is it as scary as older Resident Evil games? Not really, because those older Resident Evil games were more frustrating because of their horrible controls than later games were. So Sure, it kind of leans a little bit more to the action side, but I think there's enough horror elements that make it a fun game. But I just feel like if they tried to remake Resident Evil 5, it would be a completely different game. They would go so far as like taking it out of Africa, putting more of the game in the darkness, maybe removing Sheva entirely, telling a completely alternate story. And if you're going to change the game that much, you should just go right into Resident Evil 9 and just leave this game alone. And isn't Resident Evil 5, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it like the highest selling Resident Evil game of all time? And yet apparently everyone on the planet except me and a few others hates this game. So like, why would you want to do that? I mean, as much as I hate the idea that they're remaking 4, and personally, I think that they should have remade games like Code Veronica or Resident Evil 0, or heck, even go back and remake the first Resident Evil game again and put it with the over-the-shoulders camera angles instead of it just being an updated version of the original style of Resident Evil 1. I just think that they would just change it to such a degree that it would be completely unrecognizable. And I don't think remakes should do that. Like, if you're going to remake it, you should take what is already there and try to improve it. And I don't think that they would do that with 5. I really don't think they would do that. I would even think they would go so far as take out the co-op element entirely. And then it just wouldn't be Resident Evil 5 anymore. Just make a whole new game and continue on from there. It just kind of feels like we're in this weird period of Resident Evil where there's like two different paths. They're trying to continue the main story of games, which, I'm sure eventually they're gonna like announce a Resident Evil 9, and it's like, is that connected to like these newer games? Like, is it connected to Resident Evils 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, or Village as they call it? And then you have like the secondary path where it starts from 2, 3, and this remake of 4. You have like these two different storylines. Are they ever going to converge? Are they separate? Like, are we eventually going to see a remake to 5? Are we going to see a remake to 6? Are we going to see a remake to 7? Are we going to a remake to Village? Like, how far are we going to take these remakes before it gets kind of ridiculous? And again, I'm already not really looking forward to the Resident Evil 4 remake because the more I see of this game, the less I want to play it. Just because I love Resident Evil 4 so much. And I just don't think you can... You shouldn't mess with a classic and masterpiece like Resident Evil 4, the original Resident Evil 4. I just think it should have been left alone or maybe held off a little bit longer. Let's tackle some of these other Resident Evil games first before we go into 4, which is the most innovative and by far one of the more popular Resident Evil games in the franchise. And I think that with the amount of changes that I've seen them do to Resident Evil 4, they're going to add that extreme amount of change to something like Resident Evil 5 to the point where it might be a game I would actively kind of avoid. And I just don't want that to be the case. I want there to be just one version of Resident Evil 5 because I'm apparently only one of a few people that actually like this game in the condition that it's in and have a lot of fun with it despite some of the sillier elements. And therefore, I really hope, even though it's, wishful thinking, that they don't touch Resident Evil 5. So that's why it's a game I just don't think ever needs to be retouched again. Now, the last game I want to talk about that I hope to God never gets remade is a game that is extremely close and personal to me, as it is my second favorite video game of all time, and what is without doubt my favorite genre of games, which is JRPGs. But I hope to God, if there is a God, he does not forsake me by remaking Final Fantasy X. I don't ever want to see them touch this game again. After the disgusting display of what they did to Final Fantasy VII, I can only imagine the horror and just how pissed off I get if they even got back and retouched this game. Which, this game celebrated its 20th anniversary like maybe 2 years ago, which was a great moment. And this game is just so important to me. I probably played this game more times than any other video game that I've ever played on the most amount of platforms. I've played this on PlayStation 2, 3, 4, 5, Vita, and the Switch, and I've loved it every single time. Now, I'm aware that not everyone is too fond of Final Fantasy X, and there's some things about it that are a bit ridiculous, but I think that is kind of its charm. I just love this game and everything about it, in the condition that it's in, and I just think that a remake would just try to change all of that and turn it into something it was never supposed to be. And I don't think that they need to go back. I mean, the thought of remaking 7 had been an idea that had been floating around for years and years, and so they finally decided to get rid of these thoughts and just do it. And that so-called remake was whatever it was supposed to be. But I think that the Final Fantasy franchise is in a really, really strong position right now. And I'm really, really excited to see what they do with 16. I've loved everything that I've seen from Final Fantasy 16. I already have that limited edition for that game already pre-ordered. So perhaps if they have enough success thinking about focusing on games moving forward, they may not ever need to think about go back and try to change things that were just fine the way it was. I just think that there's a very, very serious difference between the team working at Square Enix and the team that was working at Squaresoft. I think there's far more passion for games back then than games that are out right now, or at least from the developers and team that's working on the current games, which I'm not saying that they're not passionate, but I just think there's a complete different mindset and approach to how they want to make games. And I just don't want to see any of these newer ideas that have come out in the last number of years be implemented into my favorite JRPG game of all time. I just don't think it's very much needed. I don't need to see this thing get updated with its graphics. I don't need to see them change its gameplay style. I don't need to see them change how the world is operated or explored. I don't need to see any change of its music. It's perfectly fine. I think the remastered of Final Fantasies 10 and 10-2 were just fine. And there were even rumors that they might even think about trying to do a 10-3, but that's just something that I think was just kind of wishful thinking. So, again, don't ever want to see them do a remake of Final Fantasy X. So that is just about 5 games that I hope never get remade. Now that you guys know 5 games that I hope to never get remade, what are some of your guys' all-time favorite video games that you personally would not like to see get remade? Let me know in the comments down below, and like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you all guys next time.